Rust-colored water runs out from under the white wall of Taylor Glacier. It's salty. It stays liquid at 14 degrees Fahrenheit, and it comes from a body of water sealed under the ice from more than 1 million years, where bacteria live that have never seen light. On a nearby island, inside the crater of a mountain more than 12,000 feet high, an open lake of liquid lava has burned around the clock since the early 70s without going out once. Fire and 58 below. One helicopter flight between them. And at the end, there is what came up from the floor of the Amundsen Sea, 560 miles from the pole. Roots. A fine living web that grew through ancient soil at a latitude where the sun today stays below the horizon for 4 months straight. Picture a school atlas, a white patch at the bottom of the globe, flat, featureless, labeled with a single word, and behind that word, most of us hold nothing concrete at all. Are you sure there is nothing under it but ice and rock? Second question. You were taught that the map is finished. Satellites have flown over everything. Every square foot of land photographed, measured, and named. Then how does this planet make room for a mountain range the size of the Alps, with sharp peaks and river valleys that no human being has ever seen? Third question. The uncomfortable one. You're used to everything alive feeding off the sun. Grass takes light, the cow takes the grass, and the chain runs up to you. What happens to that chain where light hasn't reached for 15 million years? The answers are spread across 10 places on a single continent, and reaching them means working downward, from the surface, toward what the surface hides. We start at the bottom. The deepest point of land on the planet lies in East Antarctica, under Denman Glacier. You cannot see it. In 2020, a team led by Matthew Morligem assembled a map of the continent's bed called Bed Machine. Thousands of miles of radar profiles, measured ice velocities, and a calculation built on conservation of mass. Radar shines through ice and catches the echo off bedrock. Where no echo comes back, math takes over. Under Denman, the math returned a hole. The floor of that trough sits roughly 11,500 feet below sea level. The Grand Canyon is about a mile deep at its deepest point. The trench under Denman goes down more than twice that. It is narrow and long, about 12 miles across, and it runs a good 60 miles inland from the coastline. There is no air in it, no water either. It is packed with ice to the top. Nothing on the surface shows any of this. A flat field to the horizon, the crust squeaking underfoot like packing foam, ground drift pulling snow one way and holding that direction for hours. The wind here runs off the continent and down toward the ocean, and it almost never turns. No landmark anywhere. Sound behaves differently too. A voice goes into the snow and never comes back as an echo, because there is nothing to bounce it off. A person walking across a field like that loses all sense of distance within half an hour, because the eye has nothing to hold on to. Denman Glacier slides toward the coast and runs into the Shackleton ice shelf. Its whole bed lies below sea level, and the floor drops lower the farther inland you go. Warm ocean water pushing into a trough like that meets no ridge to stop it, and it keeps working its way deeper under the ice. The line where the glacier lifts off the rock and starts to float has retreated several miles at Denman over the past few decades. Denman alone holds enough ice to raise global sea level by about 5 feet. The door is open. Ice fills everything here. Every hollow, every trough, every crack in the bedrock, and for more than 1,000 miles around there is not a single patch of bare stone. On the far side of the continent, there are valleys where ice doesn't hold at all. It goes before it can settle. The McMurdo dry valleys sit near the shore of the Ross Sea, about 120 miles from the largest ice shelf on the planet. Together, the valleys cover roughly 1,700 square miles of bare rock and gravel, and they make up the biggest ice-free area on the continent. Snow does fall here, it just doesn't last to spring. The reason is wind. Air spills off the polar plateau almost 2 miles up, dragged down by its own weight, compressing as it drops, warming, arriving at the valley floor dry and relatively mild. That wind has a name: katabatic. It strips and evaporates snow faster than snow can pile up, and the surrounding ranges act as a dam that keeps plateau glaciers out. No rain has fallen here for about 2 million years. All of written human history covers roughly 5,000 years, 1/400th of that stretch. The air is so dry that lips split within the first hour, and the skin over your knuckles cracks open on its own, with no scratch and no cut. And there is no smell. None. No soil, no water, no rot, because there is nothing here to rot and nothing to rot it. NASA has used these valleys since the 70s. Instruments for the landers sent to Mars were tested here, and machines still get run across ground considered the closest earthly match for Martian soil. Since 1993, a long-term ecological research program has run in the valleys without a break. The same transects, the same measurements, year after year. The whole area is protected. You get in only by permit and only by helicopter from McMurdo Station, and you walk only on marked routes, so that a boot print doesn't sit in the gravel for a century. There is water in the valleys, and it behaves strangely. For a few weeks a year, when the sun warms the edge of a glacier, the Onyx River runs along the floor of Wright Valley, the longest river in Antarctica, about 20 miles from source to mouth. It runs away from the sea. The river heads inland and ends in a closed lake with no outlet, where water only evaporates. And deep in the valleys, on the gravel, there are seals. Dead, dried out, skin and teeth intact, dozens of miles from the nearest water. They crawled in on their own, lost somewhere near the coast, and died. And then the dry air did to the body what salt does. Radiocarbon puts finds like these at anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand years old. Nothing decays. A seal that died around the time Shakespeare was born lies in exactly the position it fell. And in one of those valleys, where bare rock meets the tongue of a glacier, a rust-colored stain several yards wide crawls down the white wall. It shows up from the air. Taylor Glacier carries the name of Griffith Taylor, an Australian geologist on Robert Scott's expedition. In 1911, he walked up to this tongue of ice, saw a red streak running down the white, and wrote that some kind of algae was probably staining it. The guess held for 50 years. The red comes from iron. Brine flows out from under the glacier with iron dissolved in an oxygen-free form, and in open air, it oxidizes within seconds, settling as rust on ice and stone. The water is salty, roughly 2 to 3 times saltier than seawater. The salt keeps it liquid at around 14 degrees Fahrenheit, while everything around it is frozen solid. Up close, it smells like metal, like a wet nail, and the orange crust on the rocks crunches underfoot and leaves a mark on your glove. The falls don't run all the time. The brine sits under pressure in a sealed pocket. The ice cracks open now and then, and the water comes out in bursts, sometimes years apart. Its source lies under the ice, a body of seawater cut off from the ocean more than 1 million years ago, when the sea pulled back from these valleys. There is no light down there, no oxygen. In 2009, Jill McCuckey and her colleagues published in the journal Science what lives in that water. The bacteria there breathe iron. In place of oxygen, they use iron and sulfur compounds dissolved out of the rock, cycling them around and rebuilding them over and over, pulling energy out of pure chemistry. This way of feeding has a name: chemosynthesis, and we come back to it when we reach a place where it runs on the scale of an entire lake. For a long time, this looked like an isolated pocket under one glacier. In 2015, the journal Nature Communications published results from a helicopter survey. An electromagnetic method read the rock beneath the valleys down to several hundred feet. The brine is a network. It runs for miles under the dry valleys, links separate lakes, and heads toward the coast, under the same gravel people cross by permit and on marked trails. The driest desert on Earth stands on a hidden salt system. Taylor's bacteria don't need light, but they need at least some heat, or even brine that salty eventually freezes and everything in it stops. On a continent where winter holds at 58 below, where does heat come from that owes nothing to the sun? It comes from below. On Ross Island stands Mount Erebus, 12,400 feet high. That is taller than Mount Fuji. Erebus is an active volcano, and in its main crater, open, with no crust sealing it over, sits a lake of liquid lava. Permanent lava lakes on this planet number in the single digits. Erebus has been watched since the early 70s, and in all that time, the melt has never fully hardened. The lake is small, a few dozen yards across. The lava holds at around 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, while winter air above the crater drops to 58 below, and 50 paces of loose scree separate those two numbers. A person on the crater rim feels both extremes at once. The face burns from the radiation below, the back goes numb in the wind. One side of the jacket is hot, and the other is coated in frost. It smells of sulfur. Every few hours, a gas bubble several yards wide breaks the surface of the lake and throws up chunks of glowing lava that land on snow and die hissing. You can only get up here by helicopter from McMurdo Station, and only after several days of acclimatizing. You carry a map in your head where everything already has a name. Erebus has been on it since 1841, when James Clark Ross saw a smoking mountain among the ice from his ship and named it. The inside came much later. What sits inside the mountain only began to be worked out 130 years afterward, and the Erebus Observatory, run by New Mexico Tech, watches the volcano without a break to this day. Volcanologists estimate that along with its gas, the mountain carries out about 3 ounces of gold a day, in crystals so fine they settle onto the snow for dozens of miles around. Something else happens on the slopes. Hot steam escapes from cracks and freezes instantly in the cold, and over years, a hollow ice tower several yards tall grows over every one of those cracks, with caves branching out beneath the snow. Inside, it holds near freezing. It is dark, damp, quiet, and microbes live in that darkness that are not found on the open surface of the mountain. A volcano that melts stone has grown an ice house and moved life into it. The lava lake covers a patch a few dozen yards wide. That is its limit. Now we move as far from it as this continent allows, 800 miles inland, to where the surface holds no stone, no sound, and no living smell. Vostok Station sits on an ice dome about 800 miles from the nearest coast, at an altitude of roughly 11,500 feet. On July 21, 1983, the thermometer here read 128.6 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, minus 89.2 Celsius. Nowhere on Earth has read lower. At numbers like that, diesel fuel thickens into jelly, metal turns brittle and splits on impact. Your breath freezes right in front of your face and falls away with a dry rustle. You can't take a full breath. The air scalds the throat. People learn to breathe through a scarf in short, shallow pulls. And every job outside is timed to the minute, because bare skin burns faster than a person notices. A lake sits under the station. The ice above it runs about 13,000 feet, the height of 12 Eiffel Towers stacked on top of one another. Its area is close to that of Puerto Rico. In places, the water is more than 1,500 feet deep. It is fresh, and it stays liquid from the pressure of the ice above and heat coming up out of the crust. That lake has been cut off from the atmosphere for about 15 million years. Humans and chimpanzees split later. All that time, the water has stood in total darkness, under hundreds of atmospheres of pressure, without a single contact with air, light, or anything happening above. Soviet drilling started in the 70s. The hole was worked for decades with long breaks, and to keep the walls from closing under the weight of the ice, it was filled with a mix of kerosene and freon. The last 700 feet went through a different kind of ice, lake water frozen onto the underside of the glacier over thousands of years. In February 2012, the drill reached liquid water. The lake opened. What happened next was both expected and feared. Water under pressure shot up the borehole, mixed with the drilling fluid, and froze into a plug right in the shaft, a few dozen yards above the lake itself. The ice from that plug was raised and studied. There are traces of microorganisms in it, but separating what came from the lake from what came from the surface never worked. What lives in Lake Vostok is still unknown. They got there. They didn't get there clean. 13,000 feet of ice kept the lake's contents to itself, and today it remains the largest body of water under ice that has been opened and not red. In West Antarctica, the ice is 5 times thinner. The answer came a year later. Lake Whillans lies at the other end of the continent, under an ice stream that grinds slowly toward the Ross ice shelf and drags along everything beneath it. The ice above it runs 2,600 feet, about the height of the tallest building on Earth. The lake is shallow, roughly 6 feet of water spread over some 23 square miles, a flat puddle under a skyscraper of ice. Getting in without carrying surface life down with you is harder than the drilling. Hot water solved it. The drilling water was filtered, run through ultraviolet light and hydrogen peroxide, and the hot stream melted the hole from the top down, leaving not one drop of foreign material in the shaft. On January 28, 2013, the Wizard project broke through into the lake. Samples came up within hours in sealed, sterile containers. In 2014, Brent Christner and his co-authors published the result in Nature. The water held about 130,000 cells per milliliter, the same as open ocean near the surface where sunlight falls on them. Almost 4,000 different species. The ecosystem works. Now, chemosynthesis. A plant catches light and builds organic matter out of it, and the familiar food chain starts right there, on a sunlit leaf. Here the energy comes from rock. The glacier crawling over bedrock grinds it to powder, and iron, sulfur, and ammonium end up in the water. Bacteria oxidize them and live off that reaction the way grass lives off the sun. The lake water sits just below freezing and stays liquid because of pressure and dissolved salt. Not all of it is rock. The sediment on the bottom holds organic matter millions of years old, and by composition it is marine mud. West Antarctica under this ice was once a seafloor, and the microbes of Whillans are finishing off what that ocean era left behind. An ecosystem with no sun feeds on the remains of an ecosystem that had one. The question from the opening can be put differently now.
The chain from sun to grass and upward works on the surface, and under miles of ice, in the dark, without a single photon, a different one runs, and it is no younger than the first. Both are alive. Under the same ice sheet, in its other half, lies something that appears in no photograph and on no image from space. A mountain range as long as the Alps, with sharp peaks and river valleys. No one has seen it. In 1958, a Soviet tractor traverse pushed into East Antarctica running seismic soundings. A charge on the surface, an echo off bedrock, a measurement of how long the signal took. The readings went wrong. Under a smooth dome of ice, the instrument found relief with drops of thousands of feet. The range was named for Grigory Gamburtsev, the Soviet geophysicist whose seismic methods that very expedition was using. Then, nothing for 50 years.
In 2008 and 2009, an international airborne survey worked the district. Aircraft carrying radar, a gravimeter, and a magnetometer flew a grid over the dome, covering tens of thousands of miles above a place where the surface holds nothing but snow. In 2011, the results came out in Nature, in work led by Fausto Ferraccioli. The range runs roughly 750 miles, the same length as the Alps. Nice to Vienna in a straight line gives about the same figure, and that is the easiest way to picture it. Individual peaks rise nearly 10,000 feet above sea level, and on top of them lies up to 2 miles more ice. Not one point on that range has ever come into daylight while humans have been alive. Ice creeping over mountains for tens of millions of years is supposed to grind them flat. The Gamburtsevs are intact. They have sharp ridges, steep slopes, and a network of valleys cut by water, with the classic V-shaped profile. The survey explained why. The first glaciers froze onto the peaks and turned into armor, preserving the mountains along with the riverbeds at the moment when water still ran on this continent. Under the dome lies a landscape older than the dome. On the surface above the range sits Dome A, the highest and one of the coldest points on the sheet. The snow there is packed by wind into a crust that holds a tracked vehicle and doesn't give under a boot. The horizon is flat everywhere. The question about the finished map closes simply here. An entire mountain country the size of the Alps exists, is drawn on maps, and has been seen by no one. In 1915, a man was heading for the coast of this continent, planning to cross it on foot from the Weddell Sea through the Pole to the Ross Sea. He never reached the mountains. He never reached the shore. The ship was called Endurance. Ernest Shackleton led the expedition. She was built in Norway in 1912, about 144 feet long, with a hull of oak and fir designed to take the pressure of ice. In January 1915, she was caught in pack ice in the Weddell Sea, a few dozen miles from land, and for 10 months the ice carried her north. On November 21st of that year, the ice crushed the hull, and Endurance went down. 28 men were left on the floe. All 28 survived. Before the ship went under, the navigator Frank Worsley took the position. He did it with a sextant, standing on drifting ice by the sun, with no fixed landmark on the horizon and no way to check the result. The figures went into an archive. They sat there for over a century. In March 2022, the Endurance 22 expedition, organized by the Falklands Maritime Heritage Trust, put submersibles into the Weddell Sea. They worked from an icebreaker beneath drifting pack in a narrow weather window with a little over a month allotted for the whole search. The ship was found 9,870 feet down, about 4 miles from Worsley's position. The sextant held. Pressure at that depth is around 300 times what you feel at the surface, and the water sits just below freezing. The floodlight picked out the stern, and on the stern, the carved letters of the name, whole and readable, with traces of gilding the water never washed away in a century. The deck planking is in place, the wheel stands, the portholes are intact, the glass unbroken, and anemones and sea lilies sit on the railings and rigging, the way they would on an ordinary reef. Wood in the ocean usually disappears within a few years. Shipworms eat it, bivalve mollusks that bore into timber and turn a ship's beam to powder in a season or two.
In the bottom water of the Weddell Sea, there are none. Too cold and too little food for larvae to reach adulthood and find fresh timber. So Endurance lies on the seafloor as a whole ship. Raising her is banned under the international agreement protecting Antarctic heritage. Looking is allowed. Touching is not. That floor keeps wood for centuries. The question is what else it holds, and how far back in time that memory of what used to be here actually reaches. In February 2017, the German research vessel Polarstern was working in the Amundsen Sea off the outlets of the Pine Island and Thwaites glaciers. Nothing unusual was expected. A seabed drilling rig went over the side and took a core, a column of sediment from under the ocean floor. About 100 feet below the seafloor, the color of the rock changed. In place of gray marine mud came a dense, dark layer, unlike anything above it or below it anywhere in the column.
The core was scanned with a CT machine, the same method used to look inside a human body. Inside was a root network. The roots had survived as roots, a fine tangle grown through a layer of ancient soil, with individual shoots still visible. Along with them, the layer held pollen and spores from roughly 65 kinds of plants, conifers, ferns, flowering species. The Middle Cretaceous. The layer is between 90 and 83 million years old, and dinosaurs were still walking the Earth then, with about 25 million years left before they disappeared. In the Cretaceous, the site where the core was taken lay at about 82 degrees south latitude. That is 560 miles from the South Pole, roughly the distance from Paris to Berlin, except that the whole of that road today runs across ice more than half a mile thick. A forest stood there. The work came out in Nature in 2020, with Johann Klages as lead author. By his group's calculations, the mean annual temperature at that spot held around 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Summer air warmed to 66, and river water to about 68. Rainfall matched what temperate rainforests get today. Underfoot was wet, peaty soil that a boot sank into up to the ankle. Ferns stood as tall as a person, and the air smelled of wet bark and rotting leaves. It smelled like a swamp. Now the hard part. At 82 degrees south, the polar night lasts about 4 months. The forest grew where the sun did not rise above the horizon from fall until the end of winter. 120 days of darkness. How conifers and ferns lived through that, no one has explained. To produce that climate at that latitude at all, climate models need carbon dioxide in the air several times higher than what had been assumed for the Cretaceous. That white patch at the bottom of the globe, the one we started with, was green once. Not at the edge, 560 miles from the point where a flag stands at the pole today, a living forest stood with undergrowth, rivers, and peat underfoot. The forest ran along hundreds of miles of coast. What's left fits in a tube. Everything that remains of it sits today in a cylinder the width of a saucer, pulled up from several hundred feet underwater. And cylinders like that come out of the ice itself. An ice core is a column drilled straight down out of the sheet. Snow that fell 1,000 years ago lies in it as its own layer, like a growth ring on a cut tree, and you can count it by hand. And along with the snow, bubbles of air freeze into the ice, very small ones. That is the only direct sample of ancient atmosphere science has. A bubble cracked open in a lab releases the actual air that mammoths breathed. It gets broken down into components and gives an exact figure. How much carbon dioxide, how much methane, what temperature stood over that spot that year. Everything else we know about ancient climate comes indirectly, through tree rings, corals, and sediment layers on the seafloor. Here you hold the air. The European drilling project at Dome C brought up a core just over 2 miles long. It reads out a climate record covering 800,000 years, 8 glacial cycles in a row, each with its own values for temperature and air composition. Humans are far younger. That record is nearly 3 times longer than the whole history of our species, and drilling is going deeper in the same district now, aiming for ice 1.5 million years old. Heat tears the record. If the surface of a layer has melted even once, water works its way down, passes through neighboring layers, and carries part of the signal off with it. Bubbles merge, dating slips, annual boundaries blur. Every melted layer is a page erased before anyone read it. There is nowhere to get it back. There is no second copy. More than the record is going.
Britain's Halley Station, sitting on the Brunt ice shelf, had to be taken apart and hauled away in 2016. A crack opened in the ice beneath it, and staying was not an option. The modules were put on skis and dragged 14 miles inland to firmer ground. A station that stood in one place for half a century is now treated as mobile, and its position is reviewed every season. Ice shelves around the rim of the continent are retreating faster than forecasts allowed for 10 years ago. A shelf floats on its own and doesn't raise sea level when it melts. It works as a cork. The shelf holds back the ice of the mainland and keeps it from sliding into the sea. And when the cork goes, the sliding speeds up. And ice that is moved from land into water raises the level for real. Back to the first question. You carried that white patch at the bottom of the globe in your head as an empty space with no contents and no past.
Under it lies the deepest hole in the Earth's land surface and a mountain country the size of the Alps. Under it also lies a lake 15 million years old, an ecosystem running without sun, and a layer of soil with rainforest roots 560 miles from the pole. The ice that covered all of it turned out to be the only archive of the planet's air. And the ice is going. Only one thing has no answer. How a forest at 82 degrees south lived through 4 months without a single ray of light is something neither paleobotanists nor climate models have explained. Write in the comments which explanation you find more plausible. There are two. The plants went dormant and lived off reserves, the way trees do in winter. Or, carbon dioxide and heat ran so far above today's levels that 4 months of darkness stopped being an obstacle to conifers and ferns. If places like these interest you, subscribe to the channel